Okay, welcome to the FantasyLabs podcast. This is Bryan. It is the last week of June, which means that we have free agency approaching for the NBA. We've already had it for NFL, but it's actually Thursday night, the 30th. So it means at this point, it's about 9 o'clock we're recording. So free agency is going to start in 3 hours. So I have sort of looked into free agencies and the NBA draft, which was just a couple of days ago, and the NFL draft, which is obviously a couple of weeks ago, and all sort of these off-season things with rookies and new players moving and how that's going to affect DFS coming into this fall. So I had a bunch of questions, a bunch of data, wanted to talk it through with someone, and no better person to do that than Adam Levitan. Adam, what's going on, man?
Yeah, I break myself away from the golf grind to do this podcast. You know what I mean? I'm getting ready for the Euro slate to go off. I just finished listening to your podcast with Peter and Collins. So, you know, I need a little break from golf. So I'm down to do this. That's cool.
Cool. All right, so we're going to talk both free agencies for NFL and NBA. We'll hit on the differences and nuances between those two, and we'll also talk drafts. We had just had the NBA draft. We're not going to get into super specific stuff because I do want to keep this around 30 minutes and sort of a broad, practical view of things. But then at the end, we will get into some fun discussions on some notable things like the Serge Ibaka Oladipo trade. I know you probably have some thoughts on that, Adam. I'm curious to get yours as well. But in general, we'll keep it pretty broad, and we'll hit on the DFS applications of free agencies and drafts. So let's start there, Adam. Let's start with free agencies. And my first question to you is, between the NFL and NBA free agencies, which do you think is more impactful for DFS in general?
Yeah, I think that well, obviously, like an NFL free agent is more likely to fail. And I don't have data to back this up, but typically when a guy moves teams in the NFL via free agency, I mean, the bust rate is just massive because so much is scheme dependent and then so much is age dependent. I mean, guys just fall off a cliff so much faster in the NFL. They're so much more dependent on the scheme in which they excelled in. So I'm always extremely wary of free agents changing teams for both age and scheme reasons. In the NBA, I'm far less wary of it, but as we've seen, and I think you mentioned something about Kevin Love when we were talking earlier, you know, we see guys change roles and it can just have drastic effects when a guy goes from, you know, a really dominant fantasy player goes from Minnesota to playing with LeBron is obviously a huge difference. I think being off of the NFL guys is something that I'm, you know, leaning towards in almost all close decisions.
Being off of the newer free agents that probably are going to come with ownership boosts in the beginning of the year because of the hot commodity.
Yeah, I mean, guys change teams like, and maybe this is a bad example because he's on defense, but like Albert Hainsworth, like changes teams and he gets paid and he goes different scheme and he's just a complete disaster. DeMarco Murray changes teams from the Cowboys to the Eagles and changes scheme and just a total train wreck, you know, gets paid and is coming off of huge workloads. I mean, guys get paid and they take it easy for a million reasons. You know, the guys that change teams in the NFL are guys that I'm almost always looking to avoid.
Why do you think NFL is a little harder to analyze or predict, or whatever word you want to use? Is it partly because of the roster size? I mean, rosters in NFLs are huge, whereas NBA, it's, you know, you 14 or 15 guys, and really you're only worried about 8 or 9 of those per team. So it seems like perhaps that's a reason that you can more easily predict roles and the repercussions of moves and trades. Or is there more to it than that, do you think?
Yeah, I also think that, you know, for basketball, like basketball is basketball. Guys go out there and ball. They run pick and roll. You know what I mean? They run pick and pop. It's not that complicated. When you take DeMarco Murray out of Dallas's offense, which ran, you know, all this power and stuff like that, and then they're in this Chip Kelly shotgun scheme, you know, it's just like it can mess up a lot of things. So I think that's one thing for sure. And just simply put, everybody knows who plays DFS that NBA is way easier to predict than the NFL, period, because there's so many possessions, so many more possessions and so much more, you know, continuous fantasy scoring, whereas NFL is so event-based. So yeah, just in general, NBA is going to be easier to predict.
Yeah, that's interesting. So I was listening to the Ringer, the Bill Simmons news site, the Ringer NFL podcast with Robert Mays, who was for Grantland, and then he was somewhere else. I think Monday morning quarterback for a while, and now at the Ringer again. Anyway, so on his podcast, he was talking about it's like a span of 24 hours where Michael Bennett and Cliff Averill signed for the Seahawks on their defense. This is back in 2013. We're talking years ago, and just sort of how impactful that was as a 24-hour window for the Seahawks sort of changed their the outlook of their franchise. Obviously, you have a lot of other good players for the Seahawks, but that was just a stepping stone and a big one. And that's just a sort of free agency thing that made me think about the difference between NFL and NBA. There's no NBA player that could get traded or be drafted or anything that's not fantasy relevant, right? If he's on the court, then he's fantasy relevant. Where you have these big free agent signings and drafts. We had all these defensive guys drafted in the first round. Where is it sort of easy just to forget about those guys because you don't have to worry about rostering them in DFS?
Yeah, I think people overlook defensive moves. One that sticks out to me, other than the Seahawks example that you said, is when the Broncos got DeMarcus Ware and Aqib Talib. I was like, wow, I mean, these guys are stacked, and kind of avoiding them and rostering their defense was really profitable earlier in the year before everybody got on it. I think the best NFL fantasy players, both season long and DFS, are following all the news all year round, not just skill players. So, we'll have that. I've been talking to Bales. We'll have a bunch of defensive stuff available and defensive ratings hopefully available. If DeMarcus Ware is out, how much is that a boost to X player on the offense? I think all that stuff is really important. So I would never say we should overlook or underrate defensive moves that happen. So
what's a practical example of something like that? We had my boy Josh Norman from the Panthers. He moved up north. So is that a situation where you think there's going to be an edge because the data is going to say where's the Redskins? Is that right?
Yeah.
The data is going to say the Redskins struggle against the pass. I can't even remember what the data says. But the point is, it's going to be a bit misleading early in the year because we're going to have just the past year's data to work off. We don't have that free agency boost, and people sort of forget about the defensive stuff. Is that a practical example of like you fade a wide receiver against Josh Norman because people sort of think that that's a better matchup than it is?
Sure, yeah, and our models need to be malleable, and they need to be able to be changed to affect personnel. And I think the Redskins are an example, not just Josh Norman, but they have a really sick pass rushing core right now. I mean, they could be vastly improved on defense. So yeah, certainly something to look at for sure. I always want to be flexible in my models. Like using last year's data is good, but it's not the best if it's not adjusted for personnel.
Yeah, that's always an interesting debate is what is the line of when you should stop using previous year data, how you sort of weight that. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that? Is there a certain point of the year where you stop weighting the previous year because it's just not really relevant anymore?
Yeah. I mean, as soon as possible. I'm trying to be ahead of the curve, right? So if everybody else is like, well, that's the Josh Norman thing, let's wait a little bit, see how it works with Washington. I'm like, you know what? Let's just go for it and get, make a call and hope it's right. Because if you wait until it's proven, then it's too late anyways.
Yeah, I guess the best DFS players take stands on things. They could be wrong, they could be right, but they at least take a stand on something. Yeah, cool.
Exactly.
So something interesting also about free agency I wanted to ask you about. It seems like there's such a we talk about the big free agent moves. Like in the NBA, for example, we had Jeff Teague who got traded. We had Serge Ibaka got traded. And we talk about what that sort of impact is going to have on their new team. But it seems like we sometimes maybe forget the team left behind. Like, for example, Jeff Teague's leaving Atlanta. So we can talk about the free agency impact and what that's going to do for the Pacers, how Jeff Teague is going to perform. But it seems like it's almost just as important how it affected Dennis Schroder and the Atlanta Hawks, the team that Jeff Teague left. Do you think there's a bigger edge, or maybe am I overthinking that a little bit?
Oh, I mean, first of all, in a vacuum, the German strudel, the German chocolate strudel is going to absolutely destroy. He's going to
crush.
He's going to be awesome. But as DFS players, and especially DFS NBA players, we're so trained to be like, oh, X guy is out, let's roster Y. Sure. So I don't think we're pulling a fast one on anybody with Dennis Schroder. Like, depending on his price, the opening night next year, if his price is where it was last year when he was a backup, he'll be like 90% owned. I don't think that NBA DFS players overlook that at all. Maybe season-long players, maybe you could get Dennis Schroder in like the 7th or 8th round, which would be a crime. But DFS players, I don't think we're sneaking that past them.
Gotcha. You had mentioned Kevin Love earlier in that weird sort of situation that I don't think anyone was really able to predict that well. A guy who I think by all standards was a superstar level talent in Minnesota, at least on offense, in a fantasy superstar, regardless of what you want to say about him, gets traded. I think we might have expected a little bit of regression or maybe just a little dip in usage rate, which is an important stat for NBA, but I don't think we expected the quite drop off that we had, that we actually saw. So I guess my question is there a way that we can predict roles a little bit better? Was there something we missed on Kevin Love that we should have picked up on? And I know Kevin Durant is a big free agent starting tonight, and we have some other big ones like Horford and Mike Conley. Is there a way that we can better predict these roles other than just sort of guesswork?
I think, projecting usage rate is the best thing we can do. And Justin is obviously awesome at projecting usage rate for us in the models for NBA. I mean, when you go from Minnesota, where you're the first, second, third, and fourth option, to Cleveland, where they have Kyrie, whose usage rate is absolutely massive, and LeBron, who has a usage rate among the leaders in the league, obviously you're not going to touch the ball that much, and that's going to completely wreck your fantasy stats. So, yeah, I still thought that Kevin Love would hit a lot of threes. I still thought he would board. But if we were expecting him to maintain 24, 25 points a game, I think that's really silly. So yeah, I mean, just thinking about where a guy is going and what his usage rate will be. I remember when Chris Bosh was an awesome fantasy player, went to Miami, and he was still solid based on efficiency more than anything, but he was far from a superstar with Miami. So guys like that, I think, pretty obvious just on usage rate.
Yeah, so that sort of gets into the efficiency, volume, usage rate conversation, which is going to lead me into the draft part of this podcast. So we had the NBA draft a couple of days ago. We're not going to get into like nuances. I'm not going to ask your take on French Draymond Green that the Celtics took. I don't know, man. There's all sort of crazy names and foreign dudes in this draft, and I keep up with this stuff a lot, and I was lost. So I'm not going to do that to our listeners and talking nuances of that. There are other podcasts for that medium, but I do want to sort of broadly talk about rookies and drafts in general. You mentioned usage rate and volume and how important that is. And my first question to you is pertaining to the drafts in NFL and NBA and rookies in general. Is talent really even important? I mean, these guys are drafted so high and there's so much are invested, not only from a monetary cost because the top draft picks get paid a lot, but also an opportunity cost. People put a lot of their hopes into these top guys. Everyone in Philly, I know you're probably all about some Ben Simmons right now. There's the opportunity cost, there's hopes of the franchise, everything. Is talent even important, or can just volume overload that?
Yeah, I think in NBA, we've seen plenty of guys who get volume and not really be fantasy players. I mean, Dion Waiters comes to mind. I'm not in NBA mode right now, but there's like a million guys that I'm like, oh, he's getting 35 minutes tonight. I still don't care. Like, sure. That's like, their fantasy points per minute is so low. In the NFL, it's obviously totally different. If a running back is going to be out there as the starter, I don't care how bad he is, he deserves consideration. If a quarterback is going to be dropping back 40, 50 times, he's going to put up numbers to some degree. So, yeah, I think for NFL, we could use that opportunity argument. I'm hesitant to use it for NBA, but, when we're talking about Ben Simmons and Brandon Ingram to some degree and guys of that caliber, I think, assuming they're going to play 35, 36 minutes, yeah, they're going to be an option right away.
Okay, cool. I want to get into a little bit of data that I've compiled and stuff that I've looked up with the help of Bales. He's written some articles on this back a long time ago and also recently as well. And this is more pertaining to the NFL, but I think it's applicable to both. What sort of rookies do better than others? Bales did some research that shows that in general, if you're looking at first and second round picks in the NFL, quarterbacks and running backs do a lot better than wide receivers, tight ends. so much better. It's actually the breakdown is running backs do the best and quarterbacks do the second best. They're pretty close. And then it's really big dip between wide receivers and tight ends. I'm curious your thoughts. Why do you think that is? Why is it such a big dip? And why do those two positions do so much better? Running backs, I guess, the biggest one.
Yeah, well, it's pretty simple, right? I mean, for running backs, you come into the league and it's basically what you were doing in college. You run, you take the ball and you go off tackle, you go through the guard, whatever you do. That was kind of what you did in college. For wide receivers, they asked them to do so much more different things. The cornerbacks are so much better. You don't have that physical advantage. So yeah, I think a big mistake that people have been making lately is thinking that all the wide receiver classes going forward are going to be like the Odell Beckham, Mike Evans, Kelvin Benjamin class, which will go down as the greatest wide receiver class in NFL history, if you ask me, already putting their mark on it. So, all these other classes after that, the Amari Cooper class, like Amari Cooper was great. There was really nobody else, and Amari Cooper didn't exactly completely blow the doors off. I mean, he was awesome, but yeah, so I think that overrating rookie wide receivers is a huge leak that people have. People want to be excited about it, but I think that's a huge leak. And yeah, the data that Bales has here certainly bores that out.
So what exactly makes it so much different? I mean, you mentioned that they're going against different quarterbacks, they're doing different things. So what is it? Is it because it's a more one-on-one sort of matchup? They're facing a direct cornerback, whereas running back doesn't have a necessarily one-on-one guy. I mean, they have linebackers that could shadow them. They could have defensive ends that try to get to them quickly, but it's not necessarily one guy that's targeting them.
Yeah, and I think those are valid. I think it's also like in college, a lot of these guys just be like, hey, I'm going to run down the field. You throw it up to me, and I'm going to go get it. That's kind of like what Mike Evans and Johnny Manziel did and all these other guys. Like, they don't even really have to run routes really at all. They just, or seem to be open because they're faster than everybody else or open because they're bigger than everybody else. And then they get to the NFL and it's like, wait, I actually have to run a precise route and I have to be on exact timing with my quarterback. And open is so much a smaller window than open was in college. So yeah, I just think it's really hard for rookie wide receivers and really hard for rookie tight ends based on, what they're asked to do in the blocking game too. So yeah, I think it really makes a lot of sense that I think Bales specifically highlights mobile quarterbacks and running backs as the rookies that we want to look at.
So what made that class so different? Is it just, like we talked about, I mentioned that talent isn't important. Maybe this is an example where talent just trumps the data. Odell Beckham and Mike Evans are just freaks.
Yeah, and that's what it's looking like, right? I mean, we still have a relatively small sample on these guys. It's only it's only been 2 years, but I mean, Sammy Watkins, Mike Evans, Odell Beckham, Brandon Cooks, Kelvin Benjamin, Jordan Matthews. I think Jarvis Landry was in there. It's just crazy. Like Allen Robinson was in there.
I forgot about him.
Right. So like, yeah, you would put these guys up against anybody in terms of a talent perspective. So I think it's just an outlier talent class is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, so I'm sort of putting you on the spot. This wasn't one of the many questions I sent you pre-pod. Is there any sort of player like that you know about in the draft for this year?
I would say Ezekiel Elliott, if we're talking about running backs, looks to me like he's equal the prospect that Todd Gurley was. At least equal the prospect that Todd Gurley was, probably better because he's better in the pass game. But yeah, in terms of wide receivers, no, I don't think that there is. Yeah.
So that's a more of a fade for this year. Interesting. And I think there's probably an edge, like you said. People are going to be expecting rookie wide receivers to match that production where it's not going to come.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, I think Will Fuller was the first wide receiver taken this year, which is just a joke. I mean, a lot of the draft people I respect had him as, kind of a one-trick pony field stretcher only. So, yeah, I think like guys like Josh Doxson and Corey Coleman were more interesting and from a talent perspective, but I don't think they're anywhere near that class that we were talking about.
Fair enough. How do we measure the impact of non-skill position? I mean, we talked about the example that I gave or you gave with defensive guys, and I talked about Michael Bennett, Cliff Averill, the Seahawks guys, these sort of free agent signings on the defensive end side of things and how they impact DFS. is that the case for NFL for rookies, or is it just really hard for an individual rookie to affect DFS that much on the defensive side?
Yeah, I mean, the bust rate is so high. Like, even like some of those cornerbacks like Morris Claiborne, that guys that went really, really high turned out to be bust. So I'm real hesitant to be scared of a rookie defender unless he really proves it to me.
Okay. Yeah, that's definitely fair. So I'm curious about your thoughts on just edges in general with rookies. Even if we have the best sort of data and we can analyze NFL and NBA the best, and we know that this player is going to outperform what the public is going to think in terms of a rookie in his first couple of weeks. There's probably nothing like that for Ezekiel Elliott. Everyone's going to love him. But let's say there's a third-round wide receiver that we think is awesome, and we decide to get him. All right, there's an edge. How long does that last? And then in turn, sort of why are rookies important if the edge only lasts just a little bit?
I think that's the case with any DFS play that you think is under the radar, right? Like, there's an edge until everybody's on it, until like there's an article on FantasyLabs about it, an article on RotoGrinders about it, then it's over. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, like, John Rahm in golf was like 35% owned in his first career PGA tournament. Like, I don't know. Is there really an edge there? Like, Todd Gurley in his first start for the Rams was like 60% owned. If we can dig deeper, like you mentioned, and find a guy that we really like, we might be able to extend that further. And if there's doubts about a guy, I think David Johnson is an example, because he had this tag coming out of college that he was only a space back, couldn't run inside, couldn't run at the goal line. That's what the whole draft community said. They turned out to be dead wrong. And in cases where the consensus is wrong, we can get some more leeway. I faded Odell Beckham a lot his rookie year when he was just going ham.
Me too.
Because, I mean, Odell Beckham, he had 2 touchdowns his entire SEC career at LSU, and he was, relatively undersized. I was like, oh, this is going to end, and everybody was on him, and I thought that I was getting an edge by fading. Meanwhile, I was losing all my money by fading. So, yeah, I think it's like any play that comes off the radar. We have to evaluate how long it's going to go for and how our expectations are going to mesh with ownership.
After watching Odell Beckham in the NFL with the Giants, and with a decent quarterback in Eli, not an elite guy by any means, after watching him in the NFL, how bad do you think Zach Mettenberger is?
I mean, I played Mettenberger last year. Mettenberger, what a disaster, man. Because, like, I used him in preseason, and he was actually really good. And then when he got to start for the Titans, I was like, this, he was min. I was like, this can't go wrong. And he's just turned out to be so bad.
Yeah, if you look at that Odell Beckham's last year at LSU, if you look at the roster with Mettenberger and Odell, Jarvis Landry, I know who's a really good possession guy. I mean,
Jeremy Hill was on that team, I think, right?
God, I know. Yeah, he had so many good skill position guys, and and Zach Mettenberger was sort of average. Amazing that he was average in college with those guys.
Yeah.
So, in my last question before we get to the fun questions with about the trades and stuff in the NBA, if we can predict rookie progression throughout the year, and we can, Bayless has done studies, and I linked you an article, and I can put this in the description as well, the article that Bayless wrote, where it does show, the data shows that on average rookies get a lot better throughout the year. This is in both NBA and NFL.
Mm-hmm.
They have a big progression. There's usually a learning curve at the beginning of the year, but then they get a lot better. Is there any edge to be had, or do people just sort of notice that?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of reasons why that data is what it is. First, teams that are out of the playoff race tend to play their young players more. So as the season moves along, they realize that they're dead. They're like, hey, let's give these guys some more playing time. I think that happens NBA definitely, and NFL to some extent too. So there's certainly a reason for data there. Also in the NFL, especially, veterans get hurt, and then all of a sudden rookies play more. So as the season goes along, there's more injuries, rookies play more. But from a standpoint of, hey, nothing's happened here, they're not out of the playoff race, nobody's gotten hurt, rookies are just progressing nicely. There's certainly an edge there if you can find that. So it's not a situation that a lot of people would be on because there was no injury, there was no major depth chart change. It's just something that you notice, like, hey, X coach is suddenly trusting Y player a little bit more. I think, when Jeremy Hill overtook Gio Bernard for really no good reason 2 years ago. And Jeremy Hill just went absolutely ham. The guy who won $1 million in the FanDuel final had Jeremy Hill in one of those games when Gio was still starting. And this dude used Jeremy Hill because he noticed that slowly they were getting off of Gio as their main back and moving on to Jeremy Hill. I mean, he was the only one that used him in that FanDuel Live final. And Jeremy Hill went ham. The dude won $1 million. So, I think if you notice something that's going on outside of an injury or an obvious depth chart change, I think that makes sense.
Yeah, and as to a point that you brought up earlier, maybe this is where we can use Narrative Street to our advantage. I mean, there's going to be a lot of strong consensus takes about these guys coming from the draft. I mean, everyone thinks that Ezekiel Elliott is going to be like the fantasy running back. And people are going to have a lot of opinions about Ben Simmons and Brandon Ingram and all these top guys. And maybe this is where you can use the narrative to your advantage. If you think that a player is going to be less than stellar, did you fade them?
Yeah. Oh, early in the season is like the perfect time to be contrarian because we really don't know, right? Like as the season goes along, we know more and more. And even, recreational players or bad players, they know more and more as the season goes on. The time where everybody thinks that they're right and they're more likely to be wrong is early in the season. Yeah,
I agree. Yeah, that's great stuff. Before we move on and I'll let you go, Adam, I'm curious your thoughts about these trades and free agency stuff. I definitely wanted to keep most of this pod evergreen. I think we did that, but last couple of minutes we'll get a little fun with it. Serge Ibaka Oladipo trade. Obviously, there's a little more to it with Sabonis going there as well. It's interesting to me. I'm curious your thoughts. You're a big NBA guy, as I am, and I'm curious your thoughts on it because I have a very different opinion than other people.
I thought that Serge Ibaka was just a grossly underutilized, unique skill set last year in Oklahoma City. I mean, how many guys can protect the rim like Serge Ibaka can and also be one of the best mid-range jump shooters in the league with a shot out to the three-point line? But his skill set was somewhat wasted. I mean, he would literally just go to the corner for the Thunder and stand there on offense. And I think that affected his defense also. So, going to Orlando and playing next to Vucevic, I think makes a lot of sense. Giving up Victor Oladipo to me is risky because I think Victor Oladipo is a unique player also as a ball handler and scorer and very good defender. So I thought that was somewhat risky, but I don't think it's as egregious as people thought. I mean, people thought it was like the worst trade in the history of the world for the Magic. They're ready to write off Serge Ibaka because he was really bad last year. I just thought he was underutilized last year. I don't know what you think about that.
Yeah, so my initial take, and I put this on Twitter, and I still believe it, even though I can understand the other side a little bit more. I thought it was a bad trade for the Thunder. I was just like, I don't know why this is happening. I mean, the windows of these titles are just so small. I mean, we saw how hard it was for the Thunder after going to the finals. We thought they were going to make 6 straight finals, and all of a sudden, say what you want, they probably should have made the finals this year, but now it's since Harden, they haven't made the finals again, and these title windows are so small. They've lost a series with the big three with Russ and KD and Ibaka. Ibaka is such an important. I get that Adams is a very important rim protector for them. Now he could probably step up into that. Ibaka is just such a unique guy. There's like 4 players in the entire world that can do what he does with his shooting and his rim protection. That's great. I mean, you're probably setting yourself up long-term better with Oladipo and Sabonis and the guys that they got. And Ibaka was going to be a free agent anyway. I get all that. Man, you could have won the championship next year, and I think that you're worse off. So that's my thought. When you have a title window, I think you go for it.
Yeah. Well, what do you think about the idea that they want to be able to play Canter and Adams more together, and Ibaka was blocking that up?
Then I would say, why are you playing Canter over Ibaka?
Right.
Yeah. I get both sides why they do it, why they did it. I don't think it's perfectly as simple as it seems for either team. If I don't like it for the Thunder, I guess I sort of should have liked it for the Magic, but I don't even particularly love it for the Magic either. I think it's an interesting trade, not something I love.
Well, they're going to free Mario though. Like Mario Hezonja could be something.
I love Mario, dude. Oh, I'm so ready for it. Yeah. Mario time. I'm ready for it. Yeah, that's probably the best thing about this trade. Less about Ibaka, less about Oladipo. The real thing is that it just frees up Mario.
Yeah. Mario could go ham early in the year.
Yeah. Where's KD going? I'll end on this one.
He's going to Oklahoma City. What do you mean?
Okay. All right. Well, you're calling it. I mean, we have the free agency start in 2.5 hours. So people, by the time they're listening to this tomorrow, could either think that you're brilliant for this prediction or quite dumb.
I read something he can make like $16 million more by signing a 1-year deal with Oklahoma City and then going back into free agency next year or something like that. Am I wrong?
Yeah, it's some ridiculous amount of millions of dollars.
Come on. I don't care how rich you are. You're not passing that up.
$16 million is a lot of money.
Yeah.
Any of us would take $16 million. Yeah, we're talking about Jeremy Hill winning a guy $1 million. That's nothing compared to what KD. All right. Sounds good. Adam, thanks a lot, man. Thanks everyone for listening. I hope you enjoy the podcast about free agency drafts and how to use rookies in both NFL and NBA DFS. Adam, I hope you survive the rest of the summer with your golf and whatever else you're doing. I don't know, man.
Yeah. By the time you guys are listening to this tomorrow, hopefully Kung Tae Kim is roughly 6 under par. KT Kim, 6 under par.
Bridgestone, he's winning. KT Kim. All right, Adam, thanks a lot, man. We'll talk to you down the road.
All right, later on.
All right, see you guys.